I'm here today to talk about how to make marketing revenue driven. I appreciate the people that have stayed, taking the time. I'm aware that obviously I was, make sure I get my clicker, there we go. Thank you for the people that have stayed. There's obviously over 135 talks taking place over the couple of days, so anyone that stayed here, thank you very much. So I'm going to start off by talking about the importance of reporting to revenue. Now, a lot of what I'm going to cover today isn't necessarily rocket science. It's stuff that you guys will know. It's stuff that you guys have been talking about before. I'll walk around a little bit. But there's essentially kind of two buckets of why we should report to revenue. So at the top part there, it helps you make smarter decisions and it helps improve allocation of resources. So what I mean by that is actually a stat I read this morning. Someone sent it to me. 19% of the marketing leaders that report to revenue are 70% more effective with their ROIs. And that's because it allows you to make decisions based not just on leads, but also on the volume of revenue. And what does that mean in practice? Well, if you take 100 leads that have come into your sales funnel, and they turn into your 20 SQLs, that might turn into your 4 pieces of one business eventually, rather than always optimizing for the 100 leads you get, and the 96 leads that you get that don't ever turn into revenue, you're able to concentrate on the 4 that do eventually turn into something that drives value for you. That's where this second part comes in as well, which is proving marketing's value and protecting your job. So it's pretty well known in the industry that the average life cycle for a CMO is anything between kind of 1.5 to 2 years. So when you look at people that are in SEO and paid media, their average life cycles of their roles in companies tends to be more like 3 to 4 years. So statistically speaking, at some point during your kind of working like environments, you will have a change of marketing leadership. You might be the marketing leader, but there will be change. So we have to find a way to actually prove our value. Now, if anyone in this room has the ability to show me a bank that accepts leads as a form of currency, I'd love to know it. But last time I checked, it was only pounds, dollars, euros, and the odd Tanzanian shilling, if that's the currency you work in. And so when these changes happen, you have to be able to prove the fact that what you're doing and the activity you're driving is generating revenue outcomes for your business. So, really good example here. 2 campaigns, pretty similar. So, spend £5,000, leads 50, cost per lead of 100. Campaign B, spent the same £5,000, you've only got 20 leads, and the cost per lead is £250. Who thinks that campaign A is better? And who thinks campaign B? Cool, and thank you for like the 10% of people that put their hand up. I really appreciate that. The reality is when you start looking throughout the entire funnel, you'll see that campaign A won 2 pieces of business at revenue of £20,000. Campaign B would have had 4 pieces of one revenue, or 4 closed one pieces of business at a revenue of £40,000. So if you didn't have that bottom line's worth of tracking, you would have continuation of resource allocations towards campaign A. You'd spend your time, your budget, your effort, and all of your team's kind of resources on optimizing that. All you would end up doing is not getting as much as you would had you been able to report directly through the revenue. I'm going to move this side to check how long I've got. So as we look here, this is a traditional kind of learning point. I'm aware there's a lot of kind of like points on here, but most people have their, they optimize, they get some awareness, they get some traffic, their leads, and then they start kind of working through this cycle up here of optimizing based on how many leads they get. But as we know, leads turn to MQLs, SQLs, opportunities, and then sales and revenue. What we need to try and do is start optimizing from here and use that as our learning point. So yes, you might want to increase SQLs, you might only care about traffic, but at least you have the opportunity then to make that decision rather than only ever being limited by leads. So, why doesn't everyone report to revenue? And this is a really important kind of thing. There's all sorts of reasons in this room why maybe your companies don't. And in order to understand why people behave in the way they do, we have to be able to understand what drives their behavior. So once we understand why people don't report to revenue, it might allow you to start picking out tactics in your own organization as to how to discuss it and how to make it happen. Number 1 for me is they don't know it's possible. Now, I'm aware of a lot of the talks here have been very kind of like B2C, e-commerce focused. This is slightly more B2B driven. We can talk about B2C later if anyone wants to grab me. But in a B2B world, people don't know it's possible. When you have, Shopify, e-commerce, all of those kind of platforms, there tends to be just a plugin that you put into Google Analytics in the back end of a WordPress site, and it just calculates it all for you. Yes, occasionally there's the odd piece that's wrong, but on the most part, it's pretty accurate. In B2B, when you look at sales pipelines and you start bringing Salesforce, HubSpot, all of these other tools into play, you can't always tell actually how much revenue comes in because there's no predetermined pipeline in B2B. So you can't just have a consistent flow. So actually, it is possible, it just takes a bit of time. And it also requires the tools and the know-how. So by the tools, I mean software. I've got a few bits and pieces later that I'll share with you, some of the software that we use. Appreciate everyone in here is probably bored of hearing about software all the time and AI and stuff, but there is tools and technologies. But also you need someone that knows what they're doing. So you don't want to give, you don't want to put a monkey behind the wheel of a rocket ship because you have no idea how to fly. So you need to have the people that know what they're doing and the tech to facilitate it. It's a significant investment, and I'll spend a bit longer on this one than maybe some of the others, because when we talk about investment, you often think investment in the terms of, pounds, dollars, your kind of financials around it. But investment actually includes time, brain space, innovation capacity. It includes all these things that we don't necessarily track on a day-to-day basis, especially in kind of, in agency worlds, we track people's time because people's times are our product. But you have to have the investment of all of those things. And a big one for me as well is also like a confidence investment. So when you first set up the idea of reporting to revenue, it's not a one day job. You have to set your tools and tech up, you have to track it through the funnel, and then you have to see, does it work? If it doesn't work, you have to try again. And it does require tinkering over time, because especially in the B2B world, there is no fixed way of structuring it. Even in B2C, the lifetime to get it up and running is slightly less. But that creates a confidence gap amongst leaders. So CMOs, obviously the 18-month cycle, they're going to be continually under pressure. Everyone is, as I'm sure you're all aware, trying to drive more results with less budget at the moment. So they're desperate to see results and driven, and this takes a bit of time. So you have to have confidence and time and financial resource to do it. But interestingly, in my opinion, it's less about the money of the investment and it's more about that time and just brain space. We all have so much on, you don't often have the opportunity to just sit and think about a problem to solve. You don't have enough data, so not to talk too much about paid media, because obviously it's BrightonSEO, but when you look at Google Ads, they always advise, 50 conversions to move through. We had a really good talk in this previous session about Meta and about how the data has to run through the APIs. You can't make revenue decisions based purely on 1 or 2 sales. So in some companies, you might only close 3 or 4 pieces of business a year because you only need to close 3 or 4. But you can't make decisions purely on the odd piece of business that's happened here or there. You have to have plenty of data to make informed decisions. You hear all sorts of different people talk about it, but statistically, they say like 1,000 kind of conversions or something is a proof point. Some people don't have that. So often I would advise you to then report full funnel, but you'd also start to think about what point you do want to optimize to. So it might still be leads, but at least if you track revenue, you can understand the impact. This is a good one. It requires everyone to play along. So the amount of times that sales and marketing won't communicate, they don't tag things in CRM systems properly, they don't share data, they don't share information, they don't share insights. It needs both parties to play along because marketing has to give sales the data they need, sales has to feed back on what's going there. And it kind of links to this kind of overarching point is they just don't want to. Because if you're a marketer, well, we are marketers, but as marketers, if we send 100 really highly qualified leads through to our sales team, and they only close 1 piece of business, there is absolutely no way they want you to put that on a spreadsheet. Because when they look at it, it proves that they're not doing their job properly. And if you're not doing your job properly, your job's on the line. So it also works both ways. We as marketers, we are not immune to criticism of that. The amount of times I'm sure people in this room have sent 50 leads off to someone, and you know that 35, 40 of those are pretty rubbish. So you don't want to know what the impact of that is either, because it will make you look bad as marketers. So when it comes to starting to think about how you report to revenue and what you need to do, you need to start being really honest amongst teams and kind of drop your egos around it and stop worrying about job preservation and stop worrying about, how might this work? What does this look like? Is it going to expose flaws? And start thinking about what's best for the company and not just you individually. Because when you start thinking about what's best for the company, it benefits you individually anyway. So, first thing, tools and technology. Spoke a little bit about this earlier. Here are some of the ones that we use, and I'm aware that these won't be all too, new. My favorite one that we use for all clients that are starting to try and report to revenue is What Converts. And for the record, I just want to say we're not sponsored by any of these. They're just tools that I like. That's a lie. Actually, we are a HubSpot partner, but that's because you get cheap onboarding. So it benefits our clients, not because I'm particularly affiliated. But what converts is about $25 a month, and it allows you to track every single form submission that comes in. Forms, phone calls, live chats, there's text, it does everything. So everything that comes from your website or digital presence can be tracked through what converts. Inside what converts, you can also add, was this lead quotable? Yes or no? How much did I quote them? And did I win the revenue? It then puts it into a really nice dashboard for you. And what converts has fantastic APIs and Zapier integrations with Google Analytics, HubSpot, and Salesforce if needed. So it allows you to start creating that central source of here's where I'm going to record my revenue. Same with HubSpot. You can get HubSpot from £50 to £60 a kind of month to start with. They're not expensive tools, but it needs you to be able to understand how to use it and what, have the individuals there to be able to leverage it. Salesforce gets a bit geeky, gets a bit expensive. We do work in it, massive kind of enterprise stuff. But again, all of these tools in here allow you to start tracking how many leads you get, how many turn into one revenue, and what that looked like. This, I wasn't going to keep this in, but our designer put it in, Mitzi, she's brilliant, and I thought, why not? Because I didn't really have anything else to fill the slide. But tracking and attribution. So you actually need someone that cares. So when people aren't tracking revenue properly, or they're not prepared to track how much has been driven, and they're not prepared to inspect what they expect from that, you have a problem. So that again is a time and budget resource to pay someone to go and check, are these leads being processed correctly? Are they moving through the funnel as they should? And is everything operating in the way I expect it to? This one here, reporting framework. So this is just a spreadsheet. It's not particularly pretty, but it does the job. And if anyone wants a template like this afterwards, ask me, we've got loads of them. But what you'll see is that we have spend, which is in total. So whenever we as an agency report to revenue, companies do it differently, but I always believe you should include what you've spent on people, agency, time, as well as your budget, because they both go in, you pay for both. But you see, we track all the normal metrics, impressions, clicks, MQLs, SQLs, customers, so all the stuff that normally comes through, but we also track revenue driven down here. Now, what I would advise some of you to do is, if you don't have access to all of these data points, which not everyone will initially, just black them out. Because what it allows is then when you start going into conversations and providing reporting and going into how has it had an impact, your leaderships, your bosses, your peers, they will see a big kind of mark and they will start asking you, why is this not, why is that blacked out? And you'll be able to say, well, it's because we don't have access to that data yet. Now, when it comes to reporting on marketing performance, sales performance, the reason we do sales and marketing is to generate revenue, and often that gets lost in translation. And then the final point from me, then we're running a little bit quicker, is do what we're doing today, start talking about it. So it's not just a case of kind of walking away from this conference. One of my favorite things about coming to Brighton SEO is it gives you time to step away from your day-to-day deliverables, your day-to-day job, and start thinking about how you can improve things kind of slightly more holistically, not in a as pressured an environment, but start talking to your peers about how they can do it, start trying to get the data, start trying to understand more about what is and is not possible. And I'm going to leave that here, so leave that up for a minute. If anyone wants to kind of speak to me on LinkedIn or grab me after about it, I've got absolutely no problem. I'm aware today's been mainly B2B, but my main, if I had to pick a main takeaway from today, is start thinking about how you can track revenue first, because once you start tracking it, it reveals opportunities that maybe you didn't know exist. I'm running a bit early, but thank you very much.